welcome back. So the next project in the Country Walk collection is this gorgeous stamp here. This is called Stonebridge. So with the Stonebridge, the sentiments are: hope meets on halfway on a bridge called faith. Good luck, we'll miss you, and thank you. So with this stamp set, I'm going to go again and I'm going to use the Zealer watercolor palette. In all the tutorials for this collection, I've opted to use the watercolor paints on this, but you can use your alcohol pens. If you're using a stays on ink pad, because it is solvent, so it won't dissolve or blur with water. And in the watercolor palette, you get this gorgeous little tray, and that's your palette. You get water brushes. Now, I keep these for when I am working outdoors and just use my regular paintbrushes for that. For some papers, I've picked up this design pad here. I think I got that in the works. I have to double check. But we're going to go on now in a moment and use all these. So to stamp first, I'm going to use my stamping platform to take the stamp. I'm going to place in the middle. We can trim around later on where we need to, if we need to trim off any excess. So I'm putting an A5 piece down, securing it in place. And then we're going to, just move those in a little bit to catch the paper. You can tape it down if you want. I'm just going to use the magnets. Next, I'm going to remove the stamp. Now, it's easier if you just pull away the backing sheet rather than pulling at the stamp, because you could stretch it. Now, they're a very strong stamp, very unlikely it will happen, but it just makes it a little bit easier. So place it down on the paper, roughly center it so we could trim around later on. Then close over the platform, press it down once just to lift the stamp and just to get it ready then for inking. Going to use my stays on pad. You might need to stamp it a couple of times, but working my way around the stamp, just loading it up, because it's a fresh stamp, you need to kind of prime it as well. So using stays on solid inks does this. So adding loads right around the stamp, and then we're going to close it over and press it down. So closing over. Now just make sure you get a lot of pressure, particularly on the center part here. If you want to stand up to do this, it'll give you a bit more pressure on it. But I've fast forwarded a bit here because I've had to add a little bit more ink to this and then press it down again. But this is the final result. So we're just going to remove it from the stamping platform. And then you should wipe down your stamp and then return it to its carrier sheet. So I'm just using a wet wipe here that you can actually, with these wet wipes, put them all in a little cloth bag, wash them in your washing machine, and then you can use them again at another stage. So you can use them over and over again. So putting away the stamping platform. And then we're going to put the cap back on the ink pad, and just watch those ink pads, because if they get on your hands or on fabrics and stuff, it doesn't come out. So we're just going to get ready now to start our painting. So we have our palette and we have our small paint brushes, some fresh water, and we're just going to take the majority of moisture off the brush before we go in. So starting on a corner, just to check the colour and the density of the colour on it. Now the brush still has a fair bit of water on it because I just want to put down a light colour wash in the background, and then I'll come back later on and deepen it with more of an intense colour. So I'm directly putting it down rather than on the palette at the moment, and I'm just going to add it along the edges there just to preserve where I'm going to be adding other colours, and going back over any areas, and you see it's kind of a deeper tone here, and then working my way out. I'm not going out too far, but spreading it out now, going back in with the damp brush, and you see the way it's carrying it up into the sky there, and it'll be lighter the farther up I push it with the wet paint brush. So working my way, getting a bit more moisture, and come back in, going back in. You see there, bit darker along the edge, so that's like your horizon line. Adding more to the sky, and then come back then in with a wet brush, and I'm going to spread that up a bit further. So you don't want the brush too wet. It does dissolve out the colour, but you can work and come back, and then if it's dry and if you're not happy with how it's dried out, then you can reactivate it but with the wet brush. But you don't oversaturate the paper either, because the paper will buckle. So I'm going to add some of the paint now to the palette, but I'm going to water it down with the brush and then pick it up and then continue on, because the colour I added originally was straight from the paint itself, and that wasn't watered down, but the colour wash up the top will be. So you have a fade in the colour blue as it works up the page. So we're just going to put the finishing touches to the sky now, going back over any bits or any gaps that would have been in the colour, using the wet brush to bring it right up the top of the page. Even though I'm going to be trimming it down, I'm just coming out to the edges just to give me a little bit of room then for when I do trim it. And as always, if you want to extend the stamp, get a fine liner and add a little bit more detail to the edges of it if you want, or you can come in with a darker colour and make any changes that you want. Now I'm going back into the hillside now. I've taken the mid-coloured green and I'm just topping the hills right at the back, and I'm coming down the side there of the foliage. As I said, a lot of this will be cut away, but it's just to make sure I've got no white gaps. So putting down this light green colour wash and then coming in with a darker colour over that for shading and shadow. So I'll put down the darker colour over the lighter colour, but then I'm going to blend these in. So cleaning off my brush, taking off the excess water, but coming back in, and now I'm blending the darker colour into the lighter tone, and that will give you a nice shading and shadow in your project. And then as we work our way down, we'll be conscious of where the stone bridge is going to start. So I'm just going to come down a little bit. We can come back over that with a bit of grey, it won't matter. So adding a bit more blending to the side there. I think we are nearly done with this green up here. We still have the foreground to do, but I think that once you do your background and get your shading right, then it makes it a little bit easier. So there's a third, a really dark green here that I'm just going right up the tip now, because those other layers would have dried in. So it's really just to define the edge, you know, of the greenery to the sky, and maybe add in a few more undulations to the landscape in the background, and just to distinguish it a little bit more. You don't have to go too mad. It's merely adding some shading to some areas. Now make sure your brush is cleaned off thoroughly. Bring in some water and then blend that down. You can, some people like the look where, you know, you have the defined lines. I like to blend in my colours just to add tones and shades to it, but it's strictly a preference for how you like to do your watercolours. And with a kit like this, you don't need to be an expert. I'm a beginner watercolourist and I'm finding it very easy to use this kit, and I think that the colours that are in it are perfect to start with. So I'm just going to clean down the palette there, and then we're going to move on. So cleaning the brush, make sure it's thoroughly cleaned and taking off any excess water. I'm coming in here now with the I think we're going to work on kind of browns and taupe colours. So I'm going to water it down because I want to be careful coming in. I don't want to oversaturate it. So this is a kind of a light colour wash that I'm just laying as a foundation on the bridge. It's not going to be the final colour, but just to and it'll wet the area as well and make it easier for when I blend in the greys in the light tones and the dark tones. So just adding this into the brickwork, because with grey brick, you know, it has weathered a bit, so you'll end up with some tones of mossy greens, you'll have greys in it, you'll have some browns from foliage. So it's really just to play around with it before we start with the greys. So I'm picking up a mid-tone grey here, putting it on the palette, but I do need to be careful that I don't put in too dark saturation at the moment, because I want to go over the bricks and I'm going to add dark shadows to this first of all. It's going on quite deep, and then I'm going to come back in with the wet brush and blend that out a bit more. So under the bridge there we have more shadow and shading. So once again, put more grey on the palette. And then you don't have to add shading to all the bricks. It's just select a few just to distinguish them out from the rest of the bricks that are on your bridge. So working my way, taking time, and if you do put too much colour down, you can dab it with some kitchen roll, and that will lift the colour back up while it's wet. But don't rub it, don't drag the kitchen roll across your project, because the paint will just spread. So just work away on the areas, and I think that's coming together lovely, adding some tones to it, and a couple more down here. And as I said, if you do find that you've overdone it and you think that some areas are too dark, you just come back in with a wet brush and you can work back over the project again and blend it down. So under the bridge there you would have a dark shadow, so just to make that a bit more distinguishable to the rest of the project, I'm adding more. And then some final touches now on some of the bricks, working my way along. So I think, see, a bit too much colour there, so I'm just going to dab it, and that's lifted up any water, but it also mutes down the colour as well. So this is black now. So I want to add some black into some areas, but I don't want to have it too stark. So I'm watering it back, and then I'm literally just dabbing small areas on some of the bricks. And when that blends in then with the dark greys around it, that's when you'll get your dimension and your different shadows that are on your bricks, and gives it a more of a textured feel as well. And don't forget the dark areas, you know, near the greenery or under the bridge, where you would have some really deep shadows. So just blending that in there, and on the other side, coming up the brick, working away. Now I'm just going to pick up some more of that taupe colour, and we have some bricks and rocks in the front, and it's really starting that process again, just laying down a colour wash for that background into that area. So then keep the brush dry, then going back in as we did with the bridge with the mid-tone grey, and adding some shadow lines around the edges of that to define it. Same on the other side. And you don't have to overdo this. You could do it and let it dry, walk away from it, and then come back, and then you can add more to it if you want, dabbing away any excess moisture. And you see how it lifts up the darkness, and it actually does help with the blending as well. So that's our bridge there. And what we're going to do then is we're going to work now on the water. Water can be quite tricky, and in this palette we just have the two tones, but by using your water you can get more than the two tones like we did with the sky, but you do need to put down a base, and that's what we're going to do. So I'm bringing it onto the palette. The brush is actually quite wet, as you can see here, just so that I can spread it down just to get my base layer. I'm working there on the waterfall portion. So I'd suggest you go kind of light with the first layer, just to take the starkness out of the whiteness of the paper. and then a little bit darker around where the end of the waterfall, and then come back in then with your wet brush and draw it down the page. So we're just drawing it down like that. So again, this is just using the lighter blue, working our way, touching up any areas, and then we are going to clean our brush and go in for the darker tone. There's a fair bit of moisture on this brush, so as you can see, I'm going to start with the edges and doing flicking strokes to bring the colour down. I don't want to colour the whole area, I just want to have some strokes to show the movement of water. So I'm going around the edges there, drawing it down. Fair amount of moisture on the brush because I want it to blend in. So then working here then, as you can see, I'm just drawing it down. It's barely the tip of the brush is touching the paper because I want fine strokes just to add in the shading there. And you can put as much in or as little as you want. And if you have a white chalk pen or a seafoam pen, you could go back in there and add a little bit of foam if you wanted. Or if you have any masking fluid, go in before you start any water and colour and mask off any areas you want to stay white. So a bit more shading, because there will be shadow under the bridge, of course. And slowly building up the colour, doing it in layers, following the movement of the water. So put the finishing touches there now. And I think that's looking fairly good. Just going to see a second now, and I think a little bit more, yeah, just where the movement is. You see as it dries, it does actually change colour. It does lighten up. So that's why I say, if you do the work, then you kind of leave it for a little while and come back. So by using a drier brush like I'm doing here and adding the colour direct, that's how you get the really deep tone. So just a few more flecks, direct from the palette, so it's undiluted. And that just gives me the darkest colour possible in the areas. Just flicking it up. And if you do overwork it, just take a brush with water, dampen it out, kind of blend it all in, dab it with some tissue, and then you can start again. That's the beauty of the watercolours as opposed to the alcohol markers. So I think that looks good enough there now on the water, and we are going to move on now to the grassy area. So starting with our base colour, so picking the lightest colour, bringing it to the palette, and then we're just going to go down and put the colour wash in. So I'm just going to speed up a little through this process while we do the greenery, and I shall talk to you in a moment. Okay, now we have finished colouring, so now we're going to trim up the image. So just using a regular paper cutter here, I want to trim away as much of the white excess, which I've done. So I've just laid it out here for you to see how much that I took off. So I've really come right up to the edge of the stamp, as you can see here. So we're now ready to add this to our card project. So I have my stamped image. I have to add a bit of shading. So this is just going to be in a regular A5 card. So for the layers, I'm just going to distress up the paper a bit, and I'm using the Tim Holtz weathered wood here and my ink blender, and I'm going to work my way around just the edges of this paper. I think that it adds a little bit of extra dimension when it is matted and layered up onto our cardstock. So behind that then I'm going to have a layer of green. It's not glitter, but it is a shiny cardstock there from Hunky Dory. That adorable scorable, that's the word I was looking for. So I'm going to add some adorable scorable behind that and then layer that up then onto some black cardstock, and that's going to be my matte and layers for the basis of the project. So adding more ink around the edges, not coming in too far. I just want to give that weathered old look feel to the cardstock. One more side to go down now. I'm using an ink blender here. You can use, it's the round one, you can use the square. You can even use a brush. I see some of those fancy like makeup brushes, blending brushes now. I don't get on with them at all. I still prefer my foam pads because I find the brushes sometimes leave kind of a streak. So I think I'll be sticking with my foam pads, but I might give them a go in another project and just see how funny my efforts will be with them. So as I said, then I've got my black cardstock and then I've got the adorable scorable, and then I'm just going to glue this to the black cardstock. I'm using a fine point glue applicator here. You can use a tape pen, red liner tape, double-sided tape. I just like to use the liquid glue now and again. So just layering that up, and as I said, the card base was just made with an A4 sheet of cardstock folded in half, so all the papers are measured to go with that. So this is the grey weathered cardstock that we've just worked on, so I'm going to add that over the green layer. So then we've got some colours in it, you know, that I'm lifting from the stamp. There's blues in the weathered wood ink, there's green there that's in the water of the stamp, you know, and there's blue tones as well in the paper. So all in all, they all blend together and it will bring out the detailing that's in the stamp. So pressing that down to make sure the glue has spread out. Then as I said, it was an A4 sheet folded in half in a tent fold. And we're going to place this now on our card base. So adding more of the glue to the back and a little bit in the middle. Nothing too fancy, just enough to get it to stick. And the fine point applicators are great because you can control the glue and it doesn't come out all over the place. So pressing that down and then checking the orientation of the card before I put on the toppers. So that's perfect. So what I've done then for the stamp base, I've done the same. It's black card, the green adorable scorable, and some more black card. So after you've trimmed your picture, then you cut your layers so it does fit it. So I have this all pre-measured out from earlier, and as you can see, it sits perfectly on that. And then you allow it to dry and put it in. Now, because it's watercolor paper, it does actually absorb the glue quite quickly. So turn it over and pressing it down. And then to add this then to our project, I'm going to use foam pads for some dimension. You can use the 3D silicone glue if you prefer, but I do like the foam pads. So trying to get the back off from those, another thing, isn't it? I think I spend more time fighting with the back of these foam pads than I do crafting. But anyway, right, so I want to put it on the card, but I don't want to put it in the center. I'm just going to put it over to the left-hand side there a bit because I want to add a tag and I want to add some decorative embellishments as well. So pressing that down, that's looking fairly poppy as it is. And we're ready now to add our embellishments and our sentiment down the side of the card. So for the embellishments and the sentiment, I've gone back to my stamp set there. So I'm going to use the sentiment We'll Miss You. So just getting a small little acrylic block. And then we're going to need to put this onto some white cardstock. So just taking some regular cardstock, and I'll trim this all up in a minute. But what I'm going to do first is I'm going to stamp on it, just using a smaller little black, that's a Memento dewdrop there, that's just the black one, and placing it on the cardstock, not being too particular where I put it. I could go down near the edge if I wanted, but I'm just going to stamp it in the middle. And then I'm going to get some round nesting dies. These are just generic nesting dies, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut out the sentiment on the white card. But what I want as well is I want to put a layer of black card behind this. So pick a die that's bigger, you see, so I know that the layer of the black card will fit behind it. So I'm just playing around with the layers. I just think that might be a bit too big, but you could do them in square if you wanted it. Just for a point of difference there, I decided to use the round dies. So I'm just going to take these, and I'm going to have to secure the nesting die, the round one here. So I'm just going to trim away any excess paper so that when I put it through the die cutting machine, I've got room on my cutting mat for both the black card and the white card. So lining it up, making sure the sentiment is in the middle. And then what I'm going to do is just going to use some masking tape to tape it down. But make sure I don't get any tape on the inside, because the tape will tear the paper. So to ensure that I only have the die stuck to the outer of the die cut. And then with the black card, I'm just going to do the same. Just going to tape it down, making sure it's facing the right way, of course. So a bit of tape. I like using the masking tape rather than, like sellotape or the clear tape, because it's not as hard to take off the dies afterwards. So I'm using an electronic die cutting machine. If you have your manual machine, all these dies will work with any machines, don't they? So just for a bit of speed here, I'm using the electronic die cutting machine. And I could have used rectangle nesting dies to cut out the picture, but I just went free form with that. Right, so we'll take out these off of the cutting mat. Okay, and pop them out. So there's our sentiment, and then that's our mat for behind it. So then pop away our dies. And now, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to, like I did with the backing paper, I'm going to use the Weatherwood ink pad just to buff around the edges of the sentiment, just to give that a kind of an antiqued look as well, and takes the harshness out of the white cardstock. So working my way around, making sure, trying not to get it all over my hands at the same time. So working there, yeah. So I think that's job's good. And then we're going to fix this down onto the black card, which is the backing layer. Just going to use a foam pad for this, and trimming it down because we don't need the full foam pad, so we just need one square of that. So placing it on the back, and then we're going to fix this then to the mat, centering it up, giving it a little press in center, and then flip it over, and then the other half of that foam pad then is going to be used to fix this to the card. So taking off the backing again. As I said before, I seem to spend more time taking the back off of foam pads than I do crafting. It's a bit tricky. So working my knife to bring in a little tweezers or craft knife to get the edge. This is what happens when you cut the foam pads. You lose kind of the edge, for lifting it off. Okay, so we're going to place this kind of popping over our original image. Pop that down. So that's our sentiment added from the stamp set also. And I think now that we'll just hop forward, and here it is with just some floral embellishments added to it. I literally just put these on with the silicone glue, a little bit of wire, a few flowers put around, and then used some of the Tim Holtz drops there to mimic the little beads. So there you have it. That's our finished project of the card. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you again in the next video. Thank you so much. See you all again soon.